Persona 5 The Phantom X is shockingly good. It's usually quite difficult for an offline game to make the transition to live service and still have it feel good, but somehow they managed to pull it off. And I'm saying this as a connoisseur of all things Shin Megami Tensei, and that of course includes the Persona series. I've played just about every Shin Megami Tensei game there is, including Personas 1 and 2, so I went into this game with some pretty high expectations, and I was not disappointed. In my humble opinion, I think the writing for Persona 5 The Phantom X is on par with, if not better at times, than the flagship game. But compared to its predecessor, I would say that the game moves a little bit slower and starts out with lower stakes. So the story does feel a little bit less dark early on, but I think lowering the stakes for a live service game is actually a pretty good idea. Because ideally, this is going to be a much longer story than the original Persona 5, so you don't really want to up the stakes too quickly too soon, you know what I mean? Now, besides having played the original game, I went into this one completely blind. I didn't even read the synopsis, so I was delighted to discover that Persona 5X wasn't trying to just reuse the exact same premise of the previous game, which is something they could have done and it would have worked. But I appreciate the fact that they decided to build upon their original concept of targeting people with corrupted desires and forcing them to have a change of heart by stealing the source of their desires, and they added another layer of complexity. So we're not just stealing the source of the corrupted desires of these people who are causing harm to others, we're also trying to restore lost desires. Because see, desire isn't inherently a bad thing to have. Desire is the driving force behind the will to do pretty much anything. Desire can boost your will to be amazing at baseball. That's a positive shape that desire can take. But you can also have desire towards less favorable things. And if you succumb to those negative desires, you could really hurt somebody, or at least cause them to lose their positive desires, causing them to become listless and apathetic. And that's exactly what's happening in Persona 5X. There's been a sudden increase in the amount of people with corrupted desires, and these negative desires cause them to act out all their negative impulses, whether it's pushing people randomly on subways, writing negative reviews, or just being an all-around terrible person. Now, one of the big problems here is that these negative impulses aren't necessarily illegal, but if they are, they're very difficult to prove or prosecute, meaning the police and other public safety can't really do anything about them. These people have become menaces to society, so that's what people call them, menaces. And every time a new one pops up, they lose just a little bit more faith in society. They lose their sense of hope that anything's gonna change, and so they lose their will to do anything at all. They feel powerless to help the people around them, and they think it's pointless to report anything because the police can't do anything. And that's how they lose their desire, and how we ended up with a very listless and apathetic population. And that's also why we need phantom thieves. So enter our primary protagonist, Wonder, and his faithful owl companion and expert metaverse navigator, Lefay. That's his name in Japanese, but in English we call him Lufel, which is one syllable away from Lucifel, while the Japanese name Lefay reminds me a bit more of Morgan Le Fay. And since Lufel is a counterpart to Morgana Lufel? But the Lucifel angle is pretty cool too, because Lufel is trying to cultivate desire within people, and Lucifer, when conflated with Satan, was known for tempting people to succumb to their desires. Works both ways. Anywho, with some assistance from Lufel, Wonder is able to reclaim and master his own sense of desire, which allows it to manifest as a persona which he can make use of in the cognitive realm, also known as the metaverse. And this helps him fight shadows. Shadows are basically cognitive constructs. Think of it a bit like fighting your inner demons or fighting other people's inner demons. And with the additional help of an entirely brand new cast of characters and some familiar faces, Wonder and his team of phantom thieves venture into the mind palaces of identified menaces and steal the source of their desires, forcing them to have change of hearts and turn themselves in, or at least try to make amends for the things that they've done. When people see a menace having had a change of heart, they regain their hope and faith in society, which also restores some of their desire. As I alluded to earlier, having strong desire is a bit of a slippery slope, because a positive desire can quickly become a negative influence if you succumb to it, you know? Now, it's a bit early for me to theorize about anything since we got a lot to talk about still, and this is really just my first impressions video. However, the game opens up with a remix scene from the start of Persona 5, meaning you start the game playing as Joker, not Wonder. But Wonder does show up and attack Joker in what's a very confusing opening sequence at first, until you realize that it's all part of Wonder's dream. But it might not be a dream. It might be a bit more of a premonition, because it seems as though Wonder has been having these visions of the future where the phantom thieves fail to steal the source of a menace's desires, allowing them to run rampant until something extremely terrible happens. For example, the first palace's antagonist, Kyuchi, also known as the Subway Slammer, likes to roughly shove people on the subway, which should generally just end with a few scrapes and bruises, you know? But the vision that Wonder has is of Kyuchi bumping into a lady who's pushing a stroller with a baby in it, and the baby falls down a set of stairs and doesn't make it out alive. So had the team not been successful in changing Kyuchi's heart, an infant would have died. Now, my guess here is that people with strong enough desires that can manifest themselves as personas may run the risk of falling victim to their own desires, turning their persona into a shadow. And that could be why when Joker shows up to save Wonder in the metaverse, something that happens really early on in the game, the only thing Joker says to Wonder is resist it. In other words, resist temptation. Although I will point out that one of the slogans of the game is resist tyranny, so that could also be what he's referring to, but I digress. It's still very possible that this dream we have at the very beginning of the game is actually one of those future visions, one where Wonder wasn't able to resist the temptation of his desires, or resist tyranny, I guess. It doesn't really matter if I'm right about this or not. The point is more that there's a lot of fun layers to this, and there's a lot of places they can go with it. Before we move on to gameplay, I want to just add one last little note. And that is that this game might not follow Persona 5, it might follow Persona 5 Royal. Normally that kind of thing doesn't make too much of a difference, but there are some significant plot changes in Royal versus the regular Persona 5. I will spoil none of it, I just thought this was a good piece of information for you guys to have. Okay, I want to move on and talk about the gameplay because there's a lot to like here. And let's start with the cast of characters. But I'm not just talking about the cast of main characters, I'm talking about how many characters there are. Generally the cast in a Persona game is pretty small, like it's usually around 8 or so. Persona 5X has more than a dozen at launch and will have double that probably by year 1. So I wasn't really sure how I felt about this idea at first. I thought it would be really difficult to incorporate that many characters because generally you get like one character per dungeon or palace depending on the game. And then I was just worried it would be too hard to write all these characters into like a giant metacognitive Phantom Thief syndicate. But this is where the game actually makes use of its world building because there's only a very small number of characters who are actually Phantom Thieves in your brigade for real. Those are the main characters that you get for free. Every other Phantom Thief that you can get or summon for and play as is technically something called a Phantom Idol. The Phantom Idols are essentially the power of friendship made manifest. See, one of the things the Persona series is so well known for is its social link system, the ability for you as the player and the main character to build meaningful relationships with other characters within the game. And this includes both playable and non-playable characters. Doing so tends to give the player a bunch of bonuses and unlock some special personas. But in Persona 5X, Wonder is actually helping all of these people he's building social bonds with reclaim their own desires and work through their struggles, without having to take them into the metaverse. He's just being a good dude. And once they reclaim their desires, they essentially have the potential to possess a persona. And that in turn creates a cognitive manifestation of that character as a Phantom Thief with their persona in the metaverse. And we can leverage that Phantom Idol as a playable companion. That is what a Phantom Idol is. What I really like about this is that normal people in the game don't have to have anything to do with the Phantom Thief operation to be really interesting. So you can get really creative with the types of relationships you have with these characters without having to force feed it into the plot. And you won't end up with a massive syndicate of Phantom Thieves, you just will have a massive amount of friends backing you up in real life. And that adds more richness and variety to city life, which is important because you're going to be splitting your time between city life and exploring the metaverse. And progressing in one helps you progress in the other, which brings me to the actual gameplay loop. So every day when you log in, you're going to be given activity points. Each activity point basically serves as one of your daily missions, earning you summon currency, resources, and helping you build up your social links. And you do this by going to part-time jobs, or studying, or hanging out with friends, or playing games, or going to the gym, or, like basic life stuff. Spending activity points in the city and your stamina in the metaverse is really all you need to do to claim all of the daily rewards from the battle pass. The city is also full of mini-games and shops and people to talk to and a ton of quests. And quests don't require any kind of stamina, so you can complete as many as you can unlock. The first one I stumbled upon, and the one you probably will too, featured this really beefy dude who thinks muscles can talk, and I really hope he doesn't mean that literally. But not surprisingly, he says he has a really hard time talking to women because of his muscle fixation. And it just so happens that there's this one woman who wants to talk to him. So as Wonder, we get to coach him through a very normal conversation with a very nice lady who, let's just say she doesn't have the best of intentions. Shenanigans definitely ensue, but I'm gonna let you see how this story goes for yourself because I don't want to give you too many spoilers. But what I will say is these quests are fun and ridiculous in all of the best ways. But when you're not running around being a normal person and making friends with everybody you meet, you're gonna be in the metaverse, which in itself is split into 2 parts. There's Mementos, a giant subway-style labyrinth, and Mind Palaces, which kind of serve as this game's dungeons. Both Mementos and Palaces are these very, very, very large labyrinths that have a ton of shadows to fight and treasure chests to find, and even mini-boss encounters, but we're gonna come back to them in a second. Mementos is pretty devoid of puzzles, but it is the best place to farm shadows without spending any stamina, and it's got a ton of treasure chests, so it does feel like a very nice connector region. But palaces, on the other hand, these are giant labyrinthian puzzle boxes, and I do mean giant. The first palace is like 9 floors, and these are not small floors. It took me several days to clear this whole place. And I've barely started the second palace, but just looking at some of the maps I have unlocked, this thing looks like it's gonna be around a dozen floors, if not more. Now, generally speaking, if you're only playing for the story, you only really need to clear about like 30% of a palace in order to, get through the story from point A to point B without taking any detours. But if you want to 100% the palaces, it's gonna take you a while. Their labyrinthian layouts make just navigating them part of the puzzle, but I call them puzzle boxes because they are a box that contains a lot of puzzles, which I'm pretty keen on because there's a nice mix of difficulty in these puzzles. A lot of the ones you'll encounter in the main routes through the palaces are pretty simple. They're more like the tutorial puzzles that teach you just how to use them. But once you start off-roading, the puzzles also increase in difficulty. That's not to say they're really hard, but I did have to break out a pen and paper for a couple of puzzles in the first palace. I think that's a pretty good sign. Now, I did manage to 100% the first palace, but I will warn you, exploring the entire map and solving all the puzzles will not 100% the palace. You have to also fight every mini-boss in the palace. They count towards your exploration percentage. But the nice thing is, these mini-bosses are basically combat puzzles, which I'm a huge fan of because I find fighting enemies that are just huge damage sponges to be really, really boring. Rather than just inflating HP, these mini-bosses tend to have a very interesting new mechanic or gimmick that keeps you on your toes, and a lot of that stuff is due to Shin Megami Tensei's signature weakness system. Basically, hitting an enemy's weakness gets you an additional action and also stuns the enemy until its next turn. If you manage to stun all of the enemies, you can get an additional free ultimate attack that hits every enemy for a considerable amount of damage, so trying to exploit the system is very crucial for victory. But you have to be careful because the enemy can also hit your character's weaknesses as well, and they will also get extra turns when they do that, so if you're not careful about your weakness matchups, you just might find yourself in a pretty precarious situation. Of course, some enemies don't even have weaknesses, and some only have weaknesses under certain conditions, and some can even change the element that they're weak to in real time. And all of this is without taking into consideration any sort of exclusive boss mechanics, gimmicks, or the combination of enemies that are on the team, or status ailments, which are surprisingly strong in this game. Like, if you're not careful, your team can and will get wiped out if everyone gets inflicted with rage. Ask me how I know that. Anyway, the point is there is a lot of re-strategizing you're gonna have to do on the fly during fights. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention, Wonder is a little bit unique in his gameplay in that, like every other Persona protagonist, he is known as the wild card, which means that he can wield just about any persona that you can summon. So when you're fighting shadows or summoning for new phantom idols, you'll also be collecting new personas for Wonder. Wonder can equip up to 3 personas at a time, and he can switch between these personas in battle. In this way, Wonder is completely customizable, which is a very good thing because he is required to be on every team that you have. Now, personas can be individually leveled, and they can also be fused or forged in the Velvet Room, so you can take 2 weaker personas and fuse them into an even stronger persona that you can then equip on Wonder. But overall, I am really impressed with this game, like genuinely. I was legitimately stunned when I played it. Like, what do you mean I have a free high production quality Persona game that I can just shove into my pocket and play anywhere I want to, anytime I want to? That sounds made up, but it's not. It's real. What a time to be alive. Right now is also a really good time to check out this game because if you're a fan of the original Persona 5, Joker is on banner right now. So if you want the OG, you better get him while the getting's good. But that concludes my first impressions of Persona 5 The Phantom X. The game is available to play for free right now on Steam, Google Play, and the Apple App Store. And I really think you should give it a shot. I think even if you're still skeptical about this game or you're on the fence about it, this game's still gonna be a very, very pleasant surprise if you pick it up. But it certainly won't be your last surprise. I'm gonna go play some more game now, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.